At 6 o'clock, I flipped the switch and said, "Good morning, Atlanta. We are here."
That was Jack Gibson, who was the disc jockey for the first all-black owned radio station in the United States. The station known as WERD has been a leading voice to those who needed to be heard. If not for the efforts of the station today, many famous civil rights leaders and musical artists would not be as recognized. WERD, one of the nation's first platforms for communication within the black community. Atlanta, Georgia, the birthplace of the infamous Auburn Avenue, which was also known as the cradle of the civil rights movement, was home to North America's first all-black owned and operated radio station. The historical Auburn Avenue was once dubbed the richest Negro street in the world by Fortune magazine in 1956. Atlanta was the epicenter for African American entrepreneurs and business owners. Auburn Avenue was the effect of the 1906 Atlanta race riot, which caused many African American business owners and workers to move from mixed communities to predominantly black communities. Therefore, the now historic Auburn Avenue was born and was a culmination of African American banks and insurance firms. Churches such as Big Bethel and Ebenezer Baptist Church remain landmarks and beacons of Auburn Avenue. Also, African American nightclubs and newspapers moved there. Even Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. grew up there. The area was recognized as a National Historic Landmark District in 1976 due to its importance as a black and civil rights destination. The immense growth of Auburn Avenue helped many new types of African American owned and operated businesses to come to light. Although non-black radio stations had hosted shows featuring predominantly black performers and artists, they were still owned and operated by whites. On October 3rd, 1949, WERD was the first all-African-American owned and operated radio station to be brought up in the entire North American continent. The station was directly above Madam C.J. Walker's hair salon located in the Prince Hall Masonic Lodge on Auburn Avenue. The station was also located right next to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s office. Jesse B. Blayton played a major role within the startup of the station. The station was an 1,000-watt station that featured early styles of African American music such as rhythm and blues. Blayton was also the first program director. After 5 years of being program director, Blayton passed his role of being director on a Paul E.X. Brown. WERD's programs featured different programs such as religious sermons to dance time music to news and to different styles of African American music. At the time, many new genres created by blacks were not played on white radio stations. These genres of music were known as race music. Race music was a culmination of multiple different genres of music that were not allowed to be played on white radio stations. Many pioneers of rock and roll such as Little Richard and Louis Jordan were figureheads of race music. Early black jazz, urban blues, and any genre you could think of were classified as race music. Blayton's WERD Radio is the station that brought race music to life. Along with Jesse B. Blayton and Paul E.X. Brown came Jack Gibson to WERD in 1949, who was disc jockey for the station. Joseph Dighton Gibson Jr., also known as Jack the Rapper Gibson, played a huge role in the station's upbringing. Gibson was known for having an amazing radio voice and was the announcer for his own show on WERD. He was the first person to let Dr. King use his platform for his speeches and sermons. Before moving to WERD radio station in 1949, Gibson was announcer for WJJD in Chicago, Illinois. Along with being an amazing show host, he was the first disc jockey to talk in a southern accent and use street slang in between his speeches during shows. The upbringing of the station gave so many new artists a platform to play their music. Most of the time, white radios would only host black performers if their music appealed to the audience. WERD was the gateway to the creation of new genres and let people of color experience music of their own. Artists such as Ray Charles, Nina Simone, Dionne Warwick, and many other famous artists are known today because of WERD's programming. Along with music, the station was known for countless other things. In an interview with Jack Gibson, he describes the diverse programming at WERD.
WERD.
Oh, we would have farm reports in the morning. What were the hogs doing, and how was the cotton coming in, and all of this. And then we would go into some programming of early morning music that was light, exciting. We'd have a person who did analysis of the news. And blacks had never heard that before. We had President Roosevelt was favorite entertainer. Graham Jackson played the accordion. His picture was the famous picture that they showed you as the train was leaving with Roosevelt's body on it when he died in 1945. It was pulling away, and he was standing there with the accordion, and tears was coming down his eyes. That was a famous picture that life took. Well, he was on the program, and he played the organ and the piano. That was a typical day of black radio in the very start of it, and we even had drama. I remember the WRD drama theater.
As you can see, a typical day of WERD programming consisted of more than just music. One of the specific programs featured on the station was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s sermons. Dr. King gave about 8 speeches that he prepared himself on WERD. They were all references to the Bible, but WERD was more than just a platform that Dr. King spoke on. Dr. King's process of communicating to the black community through radio gave him a huge opportunity to expand and amplify the civil rights movement. Since most black businesses and offices were so centralized in Auburn Avenue, Dr. King's office just happened to be next to WERD radio when they first opened up. WERD amplified the black community's voice by broadcasting a religious and civil rights leader that wanted to make change. The station provided Martin Luther King Jr. the platform that he needed. Who knows where the civil rights movement would stand if WERD never broadcasted something that was so looked down on at the time. Since WERD was only given an 1,000-watt radius due to Jim Crow restrictions in the late 1940s and early 1950s, the radius of the radio did not really reach many suburban areas of Atlanta. It stayed within the area of Auburn Avenue and close to neighboring black communities. They were only allowed to operate sunup to sundown due to many people not wanting African Americans communicating after dark. With the station being one of the first ways of mass communication between civil rights leaders and people of color, being so centralized within the black community really helped its longevity. Due to the fact that many southern states such as Georgia were still implementing Jim Crow laws within their many cities, I can only infer that white people were not too happy about the opening of WERD. Being in the heart of Auburn Avenue could have protected it from racist organizations. Although the opening of WERD has happened over 71 years ago, the station is still ongoing. The current manager of the station, Reese DeForest, explains the impact the station has had on the civil rights movement.
As it relates to the civil rights movement, because WERD was already in place, it gave a platform for Martin Luther King to deliver his message and coordinate logistics for the civil rights movement.
Along with being a radio station and the first major platform for communication between many civil rights leaders, it is now a museum that has been preserved for 15 years by Reese DeForest. He is focused on preserving the long-standing history of WERD and its impacts. Twice a month, every Sunday, WERD hosts a jazz show that features many well-known oldies and songs. Since black radio became relevant in the early 1950s, it has had an ongoing impact on the music industry that we know today. Looking at the top 100 songs of 2020, 26% of the artists were African American. Looking at the top 100 songs of 1958, which are mostly made up of barbershop quartets, vocal jazz, and some rock and roll bands, 24% of the artists that made up the top 100 were African American, compared to the other 76% of artists that were all different nationalities. Even though the percentage of black artists remained relatively the same, the most popular genres have shifted over the past 70 years. Looking at the most popular genre of 2020, which is R&B/hip-hop, 94% of the artists are African American, meaning only 6% of the artists are of other nationalities besides black. Many people overlook the significant role that the station played within the black community. Whether it be giving a voice to one of the most famous civil rights leaders, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., or pioneering many new genres of music, this gem of a station and its relevance should not be forgotten.